Pay for it.
Well, without further ado, let's bring on our guest. Super excited about that. Good friend Chadwick Harvey, who we've not had on in quite a while. And I just always want to keep him in the forefront of your minds because we shared his latest video with you last week as we talked about the month of Tammuz. And but Chad has incredible insight on what he calls God's prophetic timeline, God's calendar, looking at the Hebrew calendar, looking at its roots within the Old Testament, within Israel, within the history of Israel, and how that points to the end of the age. Incredible, incredible. Check out his videos, Faithful Performance. They're on YouTube. Find a way to subscribe to his newsletter. It's amazing how he keeps you up to date with his videos. Follow him on Facebook. Also, his books, God Prophetic Timeline, and God's Fishermen, Satan's Hunters, which is incredible on the prophecy of the return of God's people. Chad, always a pleasure to have you on.
Hey, how are y'all doing? It's good to be with you.
Hi, Chad. It's so good to see you.
Good to see you guys. Y'all look great.
Igualmente, as they would say in Spanish. That means back at you.
Well, Chad, I want to get some questions for you. I want to jump to that. Now, Chad, in my last week's teaching, I presented the timeline that we do about every time I teach, which is try to be a very simplified, boiled down version to say this. If you can know this, then you know what's going on. But it was a topical approach, looking at the events coming at the end of the age and beyond. Next week, I'm going to begin walking through it, just scripture by scripture, walking through that. And that's why I want to have this conversation with you, because you have a powerful book and teaching, 12-part teaching there that can be found on YouTube on your channel, Faithful Performance, called God's Prophetic Timeline. And what you do is take us back to scripture, to the word, and show how God has this timeline. Could you take a moment and share what you mean by that term? I've heard you use it a lot. What do you mean by God's prophetic timeline?
Yes, I believe that the Lord has ordained a specific timeline, even from the beginning. When we look back at Genesis, in the very beginning of the calendar, the very beginning of all these things, in Genesis 1, I believe he set a set pattern for us to understand. To understand the days of creation is very prophetic. So to me, it really starts there with the days of creation, to look at them prophetically. And then as you continue down the Torah and the prophets and etc., it gives you a more detailed timeline. Then you get into 1948, get into 1967, and so forth. Daniel's 4 kingdoms, I believe, are very important as well at the end of the age, which I believe we're seeing those come to fruition right now. And then, but it really all goes back into God's prophetic understanding of his days of creation.
I love how you work through. Can you share what you mean by that? Going back to creation prophetically.
Yes, that was,
because that's something we've not talked about here.
When I heard that this morning when I was listening, Chad, I just got the goosebumps. I was like, God does nothing haphazard. Everything God does means something. So please, get ready to get the Holy Ghost goosebumps, people.
Yeah, so as we know, God declares the end from the beginning. And so if we don't understand the book of Genesis, it's really right there, really in the Torah, Deuteronomy. It's really the book of Revelations in Deuteronomy to a certain extent. But when we look at the days of creation, whenever I wrote the book, God's Prophetic Timeline, I did not include this because I didn't know about it until after the book was written. I just started with 1948, 67, and on forward, which again are important markers. But when we look at the days of creation, really 2 Peter 3:8 and Psalms 90, it says a day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day to the Lord. Now we have to ask ourselves, why would it be written like that? So I believe it's going back to the days of creation, saying that basically God set a pattern of understanding of working 6 and resting on the 7th day. He commanded us to work 6, rest on the 7th. Leviticus 25, it says, work 6 years and rest on the 7th year, with the Shemitah year. So he set this pattern of working 6, resting 7th. I personally believe is prophetic with the days of creation, that the earth will, quote unquote, work for 6,000 years or 6 completed days. And then the day of the Lord, which is the 7th day or the 7,000th year, will occur. And if you do the calculations of that, and this is not to set dates, it's just to understand the seasons, is from Adam to Messiah, most would believe that it was 4,000 completed years or 4 completed days. And then from Messiah till now, we all believe, obviously, that it's been almost 2 completed days or 2,000 completed year, 1,000 years, which gives us an almost 6 completed days or almost 6,000 completed years, which kind of puts, if you got Messiah resurrecting and ascending on AD 30, AD 33, whatever the case may be, you can tell we're living in this season of the end of the 6th day, before the day of the Lord that the biblical prophets, every one of them says the day of the Lord, the day of wrath. That day is the 7th day, in my opinion, the 7,000th year to the 8,000th year, which is eternity. So you got the 1,000-year reign, and it works perfectly when you look at 2 Peter and also Psalms 90.
Oh, can I mention something real quick? And our friend Doug talks about this, and maybe we can have him on. But as far as what's going on Earth here, the New World Order, as people call it, they want to have one world government by 2030. So it's like Satan knows what's going on, and he's trying to follow the same timeline as the Bible, but it's counterfeit.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I do believe that it's all coming together very nicely. Jake mentioned a lot of it before. You know, when you look at the Middle East, look at North Africa, it's really shaping up the last 2 decades of what we're seeing, especially in the book of Daniel, you know, and obviously Revelation, but the book of Daniel is so important to understand. In fact, John reverts us back to the book of Daniel with the beast kingdom, stating that it will be a lion, a bear, and a leopard, which is 3 kingdoms. That's the first 3 kingdoms in Daniel 7. So he's taking us back to Daniel to understand these important kingdoms that's going to rise to power at the end of the age. I believe we're seeing that right now going on with Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and then the beast kingdom will come after that. So it's very important, as you say, to keep up with the Middle East and see what happens in 2030. Or in my mind, I think an important marker right now is what's coming up here in about 60 days on September 7th. That's the beginning of the 7th year of the sabbatical timeline, the 7-year cycle. Most people will call it the Shemitah cycle in the Bible, but this is the 7th year of the ending of this cycle. And then 2022 will begin the new cycle, which goes into a lot of prophetic understanding, in my opinion.
Can you go into that any deeper, like in one of your videos?
Yes, I did. I did a series last summer called the Shemitah Cycle, and it included America in one of them, the Ottoman Empire in the other, and then Israel in the other Shemitah Cycle. And basically, for the audience to understand, is once Israel broke the Shemitah cycle, which means the 7th year they were commanded to rest and not to plow the fields, not to prune the fields, all these things. They should let the land rest because God made a covenant with the land as well. He wanted the land to rest on the 7th year. Well, once they broke that, they were, if you read 2 Chronicles, they were really, that was part of their exile, was because they did not let the land rest as part of their judgment in Babylon for 70 years, you know, the Shemitah cycle. So when we look at it, once Israel broke the Shemitah cycle, Babylon came to power on the Shemitah cycle. 70 years later on the Shemitah cycle, Babylon fell. Medo-Persia became in power of the world that time. And ever since that time, even America has risen on the Shemitah cycle. World War I, World War II, when America was purely the dominant superpower after World War II, well, that was on the Shemitah cycle. So this 7-year cycle, Shemitah cycle, has profound relevance to not only Israel, but also to the nations, because nations rise and fall on that cycle. And I go through that in those videos. And it's going to be interesting to see, especially with the Ottoman Empire and America, and also what's going on in Israel, about this new cycle that's coming up, not this year, but next year, next fall.
So those of us who are ignorant of that, I'm calling myself ignorant, how do you spell Shemitah? For those of us who want to look it up, because I know other people who are watching are probably like, okay, how do we spell this? Because I want to look it up after. And I know Jake is biting at the bit to ask you some questions.
Well, there's some different spellings. I'll give you the South Georgia spelling, okay? You put me on the spot, Shirley, and I'm not a great speller, but Shemitah, or some people leave off the H. It's Shmita, Shemita or something like that. So it's very important. I believe I'll do another video here in a few weeks on it, because I believe it's so important for us to understand not only with the Ottoman Empire could be rising in 2023, like Jake has said, and I think it goes perfectly with that personally, with a lot of other things I go in the video with, also Israel with the new government, but also America. When you look at the economy of America, and I'm in real estate, but when you look at everything, it will be interesting to see what happens on this cycle, this 7th year and on forward into the new cycle.
Well, thank you so much. Jake, I know you have some
questions. This is just incredible. I mean, it's all of this. I mean, it's just so many layers of this timing aspect. And like you said, when they were in exile in Babylon, when it says that you're there for 70 years, it was said, this is how many years you have not kept this year of rest, this with that. And you touched on the 6,000 years, and then the 7th year, which I think we would say that 1,000 years possibly being the millennial kingdom, that period, that day of the Lord stretching into the kingdom. But also in Judaism, they count down from Adam, right? I mean, and so you'll find, I mean, if people have noticed this, probably you'll find listed sometimes a year 5,000 and such, which, if I'm not mistaken, it's probably about 300 years off or so from where the 6,000 mark. I'm not sure what year is on now, but there is some discrepancy within the Jewish countdown, isn't it? Within those years.
Yes, it's 5781 right now. Once we get to September 7th, which is the Feast of Trumpets, this the new year where they count time, is be 5782. And to make a discrepancy between the two calendars, there are two calendars that God uses. One's the civil calendar, which is, you can think of it, I call it the Genesis calendar, where time is counted from Adam to the return of the Messiah. And then the biblical calendar, the Exodus calendar, we'll call it, is when it's the spiritual calendar where you count the feast days, etc. So the one we're speaking of is the one that counts time for the prophecies of the 6,000 years, if you will. That will be that's September 7th this year. Again, you have to go to the biblical calendar first, and then relate it to the Gregorian calendar, because the calendars don't always line up with the dates. But you're exactly right. What was the question? I'm sorry, I got off.
So I mean, you said 5781, and so I'm looking at that again. I'm terrible at math, so I mean, we could say, well, we got 219 years, we're good. But isn't there possibly it's off?
Yeah, not to interrupt you, but yes, to answer your question, most would believe that the Exodus years, the 210 years, are not counted in the calendar. So if you add those to the calendar of 5780, I mean, you're looking at almost those 6,000 completed years. So
19 days, 19 years.
19 days, get ready.
My calculator, 19 years. So we have 19 years.
Yeah. So, whether that's right or wrong, and the point being, like all three of us, the point is we're in the season of the day of the Lord, with the return of the Messiah. You can look around, Jake, you've written about it in your books, Matthew 24. You look at what's going on, in the world. Look at the kingdoms, look at Israel, look at the climate of the world. And I think even some of the non-believers will understand that something's going on right now. And we all know what that is. So it's so important to understand, to me, God's calendar, his feast days, which are his divine appointments, and the covenants, those three things. If we understand those three things, the Holy Bible will make so much sense, because we're all included in those covenants, Gentile believers as well, as Romans 11, Ephesians 2, Galatians 3, all these things. And it's so important for us to be on the same page to figure out, what the Lord is telling us through the biblical prophets.
Just incredible. I mean, yeah, somebody's Donna's writing in, going to study this right now. Yeah, please do. I mean, and again, we don't want you to just take our word for it and say, this is it. We want you to dive into it and study it. And I know, Chad, you feel the same way, but one thing I hope you hear our hearts is we're just trying to relay scripture. And unfortunately, what we have now, I mean, we're 2,000 years removed from basically the New Testament, 1,900 years from the New Testament. We're even further removed from the Old Testament. We're can't do all the math, but we're so far removed, and there's layer of layer that we've had misdirected in there that we've got to get back to. And so that's our heart, is to get you back to how the original audience would have heard and understood and responded to this. Chet, as you're saying that, I shouldn't do this, but I want to test a hypothesis on you and get your thoughts. I've been wanting to pick your brain on this to begin with. When we talk about, I think you can look, as you've already said, God's got this calendar. He's got this timeline. He's got order. How do you deal with this? He has precedents over and over of time frames. And so when, again, we're not trying to set dates here, but I think we're trying to give perspective of where we are prophetically. I've got a theory that when we say, once the Jewish people have returned back home, that there could be anywhere from 400 to maybe 536 years or so until he returns. And what I mean by that is, generationally, scripturally, 40 years seems to be one of the key terms. But when we look, we already have a precedence of Israel returning from exile, and we see that at least they started returning around the 539 mark or so from when Cyrus becomes king. Takes over Babylon, but it extends back really 100 years of returning. And so I think you could even say, bring it down to like 400-year precedents. How crazy does that sound to put that in there?
I don't think it's crazy at all. It kind of reminds me of what Ezekiel's prophecy was. Remember, laying on the side, so I don't think it's crazy at all to look at all. There's so many calculations with the Lord. It's really phenomenal, how he does it with all these different things. I'd like to say one more thing about the Shemitah, if I could. The 7
do, yeah.
To me, it's very important to understand this 7-year cycle. I call it the Shemitah cycle because remember, the last 7 years, that will be a Shemitah cycle. It will not. What I'm trying to say with that is the new cycle.
We got you. We hear you. Oh, now
nope, we don't.
You shut yourself off now.
You're back.
Are you there?
There
You're back.
Are.
Okay, sorry. So the new cycle of the Shemitah cycle will begin the fall of 2022. So what I'm trying to say is, what I believe is, if the tribulation does not start in the fall of 2022, which I personally don't believe it will, then it will not start for another 7 years, because these are blocks of 7. And it's in scripture all the time with blocks of 7. I don't think it can start, in this case, 2025 or 2024. It will start at the beginning of the Shemitah cycle, and it will end at the end, in my personal opinion. So in this case, it would be begin on 2022. If not, it'll begin on 2029. If not, 2036. So I hope that makes sense, but it's a block of 7. And the Lord's very consistent with that. So that's how important this 7-year cycle is, to keep understanding of it, because the last 7 years will be a Shemitah block cycle.
And
Incredible.
That would be the last 1,000-year reign. Would that be the 7th day of rest?
I believe that's the case. I believe the day of the Lord is the 7th day of the prophetic understanding of the creation calendar.
Wow.
And the day 8 of the start of eternity, the new heaven, new earth. I mean, doesn't that point back to how the Feast of Tabernacles is recognized in a day 8? Could you touch on that? Yeah.
So the Feast of Tabernacles is an 8-day festival. It's 7 and it's also 8. So the 8th day is called Shemitah Cycle, which is new beginnings. That's Messiah. It goes back into what I believe Messiah was born on the Feast of Tabernacles, Tishri 15. And then on the 8th day, Shemitah Cycle, he was circumcised. So that's my personal belief, is he had to be born on the Lord's divine appointments. Of course he was. And I believe Tabernacles, he is the tabernacle of God. Obviously, he's everything. And then that 8th day is new beginning. So it does go into what you're saying, Jake. And even in Hebrew, if you look at the Hebrew in Genesis 1, they have 6 alephs. In this case, just think about it as the number 1. That's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is the aleph, kind of like our A is. Well, there's only 6 of them in Genesis 1:1. So the sages and the rabbis and all these folks, they believe that tells you there's going to be 6,000 years, and that's it. And then the Mashiach, as they call it, will come on the 7th day.
Wow.
Incredible. And Sherilyn, you write fiction and you ghost write and help others write as well. I mean, what if an author could, from the beginning, set down a precedence that, and it has a multiple series of 66 volume of books, and then the final of it hit that same marker with the T? I mean, would that not? I mean, how much talent and how incredible when you read that would that be to have that moment, like aha moment of wow?
It would be phenomenal. And they would need Chad or someone like Chad to direct them and make sure all the facts are right. But that would be, I think that would be a great story. One that I wouldn't write because I'm not qualified. But
No,
yes,
it's incredible. Hey, so some reason it's not showing in our comments here, but I just got to share this comment. It just came in. I wish I could post it up there. I can't say the name here, but it says, "Is that an alfalfa haircut?" Referring to me. So incredible. Thank you for that one. We needed a good laugh. No, it's not, but it does look like it. I may have to reevaluate my life now. But thank you for for that. Chad, you touched on your South Georgia roots. Now, I'm not South Georgia, but I'm Arkansas, and we talk about SEC football quite a bit. So I mean, you have similar roots in church and growing up in church, hearing the word, but never hearing this stuff. Could you, what were your thoughts as the Spirit began to reveal this in the word? Because I mean, I know your passion for it now, but I mean, what were those first thoughts and the expressions you had?
Well, yes, I grew up in church, and it was a wonderful experience. Obviously, the foundation of everything, and unfortunately, some churches, they do not include prophecy. I think it scares people, so also because of the doctrine of the rapture, the pre-trib rapture, that people just don't feel like it's necessary for the Gentile Christians to even understand it, because we'll be raptured away, which I disagree with. I think you do as well. I think we'll be here for 7 years to do our part. But anyhow, so I think those things go into it. But my own personal journey, even before I was born again, actually November 2nd this year will be 7 completed years I've been born again. And even before that, I was always interested I was one of these if not dead Christians out there, went twice a year to church and hallelujah, go about my business. But anyhow, I always was interested in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. And even before I was born again, but once I was born again, it was just really put on my heart to really search it out, because it never made sense to me how the kingdoms were in the Middle East, but then the last kingdom people put over in Europe. I just didn't understand that. So, but again, I wasn't born again or whatever. So once I was born again, it just really clicked as far as looking at the Middle East, knowing the scriptures in Daniel, and then looking at the Middle East and look what's going on. And for me personally, whenever I reviewed Turkey and Yavon, once I understood that they were that third kingdom, and then you could see the president and what's going on over there. I wrote the book in 2016, so there was a lot of movement, even with Turkey during that time. And since then, it's been phenomenal what they've done, like But for me, that was what clicked when we looked at the kingdoms and how they started falling. From 2003, Iran now. And then once you saw the third kingdom, I was like, hey, something's going on here. I think we're starting to see the book of Daniel being unsealed. And I think we'll continue to see it unsealed, so to speak. So for me, that's what made the difference, is when understanding the scriptures first, and then looking at the Middle East, and you're like, hang on, something's going on here. And then also 1948, 1967, the Jewish people making Aliyah like we've never seen since 48. It's been over 4 million of them returning to the land. And now you're seeing all these other countries, Europe. You look at Europe right now, you look at America with anti-Semitism. So you're seeing the movement. I believe the Jewish people are God's time clock. One of the time clocks to understand, when they return to the land, the time is near. They've got to be into the land. And that's what's happening. And then also with the other things we've spoken about.
It's incredible. And it's so you're born again 2014. Is that right?
On a Shemitah year, believe it or not, going back.
Well, I think we all can believe that. I think we wouldn't expect anything else, right?
What year? What year was that?
2014.
No, but what did you say that year
Oh.
was?
It was the Shemitah Cycle. You know,
Oh.
it was, yeah, that's
I believe
crazy.
it. I believe it.
Yeah. So, and what's wild is the Lord really began dealing with me 2012, starting 2012, but especially 2014 just accelerated. And spiritual prepper, 2016, the same year, God's prophetic timeline being written. I mean, just amazing. And it's so many those same time frames of some years have connected. I'd love to hear from you out there, if not just about my alfalfa haircut, but if God begin dealing with you and bringing you awareness around that same time, or maybe a different year. But I love you plug that year in, that God really begin to put these things on your heart. Chad, there's so many things I'd love to just pick your brain and hear more about, because it's just incredible. It's stuff that's true. It's out there. It's in the Word, maybe not in the forefront of the Word, but it's there. But just this idea of bringing this timeline to life. And so when we think, and I think you've already touched on this, but when we think about studying the end times, most of us, we just jump to the book of Revelation, or maybe we'll jump to Matthew 24, 25, the Olivet Discourse. But you are constantly pointing us back to the prophets and to the Old Testament. Why do you feel like the Old Testament prophets are so important in understanding Bible prophecy?
Yeah, I think those books are Book of Revelation, obviously Matthew 24, 25. I mean, obviously that's the Lord himself, telling you. So it's very important. I do believe that the Bible has said that it has to have two witnesses. And I think everything in the Book of Revelation, every single passage, you can find a second witness in the Torah or the prophets or the Psalms. I truly believe that John is just confirming what the prophet Daniel said. Even Messiah points you back to the prophet Daniel with the abomination of desolation, which in my opinion says, understand the four kingdoms and you'll understand the abomination of desolation as well. So I think it's so important to read it the way it was ordained, first with Torah, with the prophets, with the Psalms, and then go to Messiah, go to Paul, go to Revelation. I believe it just coincides beautifully together. It correlates perfectly. There's no contradictions in it. And I do believe that to get the true intent of it, the way that the prophets would have understood the nations, because if you just turn to the book of Revelation without understanding the Torah or the prophets or the biblical world that the prophets would have understood from the table of nations, then you're going to have a guessing game going on with, who's the 10 kings? I mean, some people have them all over the world and all these things, and which is nonsense when you look at it, because John tells you the beast kingdom is a lion, a bear, and a leopard. So to search that out, you have to go to Daniel 7. So that's a good example of understanding the prophets, because John's reverting you back to the book of Daniel to understand this beast kingdom is not America. It's not China. It's not Australia. It's that Middle Eastern, North Africa region of where those empires have risen and fallen: Babylon, Persia, and Yavan. Some people call it Greece. But so that's why I think it's important to understand it. Now, of course, Messiah, Paul, they all give great understanding of it in a kind of a different context of what to expect with Messiah, with tribulation, etc., and also Paul, all of these things. But I just believe that you have to go back to the original revelation of Torah and then the prophets. And then when you read, not only just for prophecy, but just in general, when it comes to God's plan of salvation, it works perfectly.
I so agree. And I really believe if you had if you could study, like you said, begin, like I said, the Torah, I believe as it was given, as Revelation was given, that if you have that foundation and then you jump to the New Testament, it just clicks. I mean, when Jesus says, look for the abomination of desolation, instantly he was taking us back to Daniel. And with that, and I know for me, for most of my, so I just was going through some books that I had in the garage. So I had moved offices, and so I just moved 15 boxes of books, just a small portion of books to another office yesterday, and I pulled out just a New Testament Bible, and it was one that I would carry in my back pocket when I was just out and about, a chance to share with individuals. And I pulled it out, and it just hit me. Now I wouldn't even think of just having the New Testament, and I may hit others wrong, but you cannot have the New Testament without that foundation of the Old Testament.
Right.
And Chad, I thank you
Right.
so much for continuing to bring us back there. And when you're saying that, it reminded me of something I wanted to be sure to share today. Our other good friends of ours, Frontier Alliance International, are debuting and opening today is a new film of theirs available free on their app called The Ballads of Exodus. Encourage you to check it out. I had the chance to see the premiere, just phenomenal. But the reason why this group who's focused on Middle Eastern missions to Israel, focused on the end times, why would they do something on Exodus? Because we're going to see the Exodus repeat itself, the ultimate Exodus coming. And so I want to encourage you to check that out. The link is there. The link above that that you've already seen probably is Chad's YouTube channel. I encourage you to check it out, subscribe, follow that. Great content. But I encourage you to check out this film. It is long. It is pushing 4 hours, but get it on a big screen, get some friends over. It's really some great insight. And again, going from that same mindset is, if we understand the Old Testament, we understand what happened there at the Exodus. And what I love about this film, it's filmed on site everywhere, especially at Mount Sinai, which is really the first film to be filmed there. So just incredible. Again, a good friend of ours too, Joel Richardson, and his as he's been sharing recently about the find of Mount Sinai in Arabia. Chad, again, we just can't thank you enough for coming on. You mentioned the Old Testament, and I heard a teaching the other day that you did, and you started with some passages, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on there. So if somebody's going to begin to dive into, dive into studying the Old Testament, laying that foundation there in the Old Testament, what's some verses that you would point them to go to?
Yeah, so whenever I look at the Torah, Old Testament, some people call it differently, Tanakh, which is the Old Testament, it's really a love story, with God's plan of salvation. And if you can look at it in that context of how he chose one man, Abraham, to start these beautiful covenants that Jesus was going to fulfill, and he did fulfill the new covenant, but he will ultimately fulfill all these when he returns. The Abrahamic, the Davidic, and the new covenant. So I would definitely go to those covenants first to understand God's plan of salvation for Jew and Gentile. You can find those in Genesis 13, 15, 17, obviously on forward, Genesis 25 through Isaac, Jacob, and then also the Davidic covenant, which is in 2 Samuel 7, and then the new covenants found in Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36. And then Messiah obviously confirmed it with his sacrifice, with his blood, but we're not living in the new covenant yet. And that's sometimes hard for people to understand. We're saved by the blood of the new covenant, but until the Jewish people accept him as their Messiah and he is their God, then that's when we'll be living in the new covenant, which is basically the millennial kingdom. So I would point people to those, but I would also point them to God's calendar and also the divine appointments of the Lord. Those three, I think, pivotal things for theology that makes the entire Bible read perfectly, and there's no guessing of what's going on. There's no replacement theology with the church over the Jewish people, etc. Is to understand these things. And remember, this God's calendar. He's the only one that appointed the sun and the moon. No human being did that. So it's his calendar. It's his feast days. It's his scriptures, and we're all his, Jew and Gentile. So one new body, one new man. So that's where I would probably point people to, is the covenants, the feast days, and the calendar.
Wow. Hey, Jake, you have a question.
Yeah, we do. We have a question. What happened to the thank you. What happened to the Armageddon News that used to put out these videos that were wonderful and helped so much to show people what's happening in the Bible, animated ones? Armageddon News, and we're privileged to be over there at Armageddon News and on YouTube and Facebook. So all the ones on YouTube should still be there. Armageddon News is on Facebook, but you may not be seeing it because Facebook has gone full bore against Armageddon News. Regardless of Armageddon News, one of the larger end time sites, and yet had been cut off, banned numerous times, and really is stifled in your feed. And what we found but you can go to Armageddon News and find it on Facebook. Everything's still there. But it's just you're not seeing the content likely, if that's what we're referring to with that. Chad, just absolutely incredible. And I tell you, it's the covenants is what got me into this. It was and thankful. It was from a seminary class that wouldn't track in these terms, but the author of the professor who'd written the textbook wrote it in using the covenants to guide the Old Testament history, and just incredible. I encourage everybody to, like I said, to look at that. And I'm going to get in trouble here, Chad. You may want to disassociate with us right now, but one of the people I have supported big time and try to keep in front of everyone is Dr. Michael Heiser, his work on the unseen realm, which is incredible. No one's doing it better in talking about the unseen realm. But I do not like the track he's going with Israel. And just encourage you to filter what you hear from all of us, from me, of course, from me, from Chad, even people like Michael Heiser. He's taken a stance where I think kind of where he's pointing that Israel is a theological term, not focusing on ethnical Israel, and which is a way to not be replacement theology according to him, but at the same time, so kind of walk both circles. And it's crazy. And I think all of us as teachers have blind spots. I don't know if Chad has one, but I think all of us do. We have focal areas, and then it's easy to be blind. And some reason, academics is completely blind to unseen realm. So I thank Michael Heiser so much for bridging that. But when it comes to the end times, when it comes to Israel, academia is just really blinded to that. And so just want to, I know many of you probably follow him, and please do keep doing it. Great stuff, great content. Love it. I'm so glad what he's doing, but proceed with caution when it comes to Israel. And that's something we're passionate about, is if you understand these covenants, you understand God being bound to them, ethnic Israel matters, and it continues to matter. Yes, as Gentiles, we've been grafted in, brought into that. So I encourage you.
Jake, he calls the Israelites my people. He doesn't say my idea or my whatever. He says those are my people.
So the way around it that is being used is yes, Jewish people can still be his people when they come to Christ, and there is a reality to that. I mean, we would all agree with that, but at the same time, God is working is not giving up on his people, and has a plan for ethnically his people as well. So Adelina, I'm probably getting your name wrong. I apologize about that. Asking, is anyone's monitoring this channel? I can't tell which channel you're coming from. We just get the comments. You can tell it's coming from YouTube. But yeah, on Facebook, Armageddon News. Every place we're coming from has been banned once or twice, and because we're friends with them, Stand Firm has been banned as well. YouTube has been good so far to not stifle much of that, but I'm sure that's coming. That's why I encourage you to get on our newsletter links. I'm not sure if I have a link there. If you go to, I'm going to post it again, the timeline video that we posted there in the comments there should be a link to join our newsletter list. And I encourage you with everybody you follow. I know if you're like me, you don't need any more emails, but as social media continues to be shut down, Facebook and YouTube, I mean, just a matter of time as these happen. Me and Chad, we may be doing good, but we may hang with the wrong people. So we're constantly facing trouble with that. So join our newsletter list. Chad, how can they follow you and get connected with you?
Yeah. The best way is on YouTube at Faithful Performance. That's where I really, just put everything out there. And like I said, I haven't had any troubles with YouTube whatsoever. So YouTube's the best way. And we do videos probably twice a month. Try to do more, but with work and everything, it's kind of hard to get them out there. But I try to do at least 2 or 3 videos a month, so you can find me on YouTube.
Absolutely. We're going to put that link again. We've shared your channel one. I'm going to share it again. Do that and subscribe so you can get notifications. And it's something we're constantly always monitoring. How can we make sure that we keep you connected to the truth? And so I encourage you, go to the link there, and for our newsletter here at Stand Firm, because we're going to constantly keep Chad's work in front of you as well.
We have
Chad.
Yes, go ahead. We have 1 minute. Chad, is there anything you want to tell the people who are watching and listening before we leave?
Well, in Revelation 19:10, it says the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So sometimes prophecy gets lost in the gospel, and spreading the news, the good news of the gospel. And what better way than to show what Messiah has done in his first coming events and what he's going to do in his second coming events. So I would lead people to really dive into prophecy. Don't be scared of it. Be very careful and responsible with it. There's a lot of crazy things out there. We need to all test everything, like Jake says, from me and everybody else. But I would just really stay tuned with the biblical prophets, with the book of Revelation. And this Shemitah cycle is something I really feel that people need to really look into, this 7-year cycle, because that's the cycle that the Lord is on, is that 7-year cycle. And the last 7 years is that Shemitah cycle. So that's what I'd like to leave people with, is to review the Shemitah.
Great stuff. I'm going to go review it now. So Jake, you have any last minute?
Yeah, Chad, we just always enjoy the opportunity to visit with you and to connect. Keep doing what you're doing. It's incredible. Thank you for being supporters of Stand Firm.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you for listening and being a part of this. David, thank you for working the controls from behind the scene. And I want to encourage everybody, hey, go check out Frontier Alliance International's FAI's app. Get it. Check out the new film. It's incredible. I put it on a big screen. You can shoot it from the app to whatever you have there. Invite the friends over, share it. I encourage you to check that out. And we'll be back next Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, and teaching through the timeline. And then we'll be back here next Friday at noon. Thank you for being here.
God bless you. Thank you, Chad. Thanks, Jake.
Guys.